In the early hours of June 3, 1982, Captain Jorge Mendes stood on the deck of the Brazilian destroyer Constituico, watching 20 luxury cruise ships anchored in Santos Bay. They were floating giants, each over 300 meters long, carrying thousands of tourists on vacation. Mendes held in his hands something his commander had ridiculed just 48 hours earlier, calling it the old man's fart, a cruel nickname for a weapon that seemed as harmless as it was ridiculous. But what would happen over the next 6 hours would prove that this device was capable of sinking 20 ships without a single drop of water being displaced. To understand this story, we must go back 3 years. In 1979, the Brazilian Navy faced an embarrassing problem: how to neutralize enemy ships in congested ports without causing an environmental disaster or killing civilians. Conventional warfare was simple: torpedoes, missiles, cannons. But what if the target was surrounded by civilian vessels? What if sinking a large ship blocked a port for months? What if fuel leaked and caused an ecological catastrophe? The Navy's answer was always the same: impossible. There is no weapon that can sink a ship without damaging its structure or causing leaks. But Admiral Roberto Gama Filho, a naval engineer who had studied acoustic physics at MIT, did not accept that answer. Gama had a controversial theory: every object has a natural vibration frequency. If you apply energy at that exact frequency, the object enters resonance and can self-destruct. It was the same principle that makes a crystal glass explode when exposed to a specific musical note, or bridges that collapse when soldiers march and sink across them. But applying this to a 50,000-ton ship? The scientific community considered the idea absurd. A ship is not a crystal glass, it is a complex steel structure designed to withstand storms, giant waves, and explosions. Furthermore, even if it were theoretically possible to find the resonance frequency, how could you generate sound waves powerful enough to destroy a 40mm thick steel hull? Gama was not intimidated. In January 1980, he gathered a secret team of 12 engineers at an isolated naval base in Ladeirio, Mato Grosso do Sul, far from the prying eyes of the press or foreign spies. The project was codenamed Silent Thunder, an ironic name for a weapon that would kill with sound. The team faced 3 monumental challenges: calculating the resonance frequency of different ship classes, creating an underwater sound transmitter capable of generating megawatts of acoustic energy, and making the device small enough to be installed discreetly on the seabed and activated remotely. For 18 months, the team worked in absolute secrecy. Navy mainframe computers were used at night to simulate structural vibrations, and tests were conducted on decommissioned ships in remote areas. In August 1981, the first prototype was ready. It looked pathetic. It was a steel cylinder 2 meters long and 60 centimeters in diameter, covered in electronic circuits and batteries. It weighed only 300 kilograms. When Gama presented the device to the Navy High Command, the reaction was disbelief and even stifled laughter. Admiral Carlos Duque, a veteran with a 40-year career, looked at the cylinder and said sarcastically, "It sounds like an old man's fart. Weak, smelly, and no one takes it seriously." The nickname stuck instantly. In the corridors of the Navy, Project Silent Thunder became known as Operation Old Man's Fart. Gama was furious, but he decided to use the contempt as fuel. He demanded a real test under controlled conditions to prove his ridiculous weapon worked. On October 15, 1981, the Navy authorized a controlled test in Sepetiba Bay, Rio de Janeiro. The target was the Almirante Saldanha, a decommissioned 12,000-ton tanker destined for the scrap heap. 3 old man's fart devices were installed on the floor of the bay, forming a triangle around the ship. Each was calibrated to emit waves at 7.3 Hz, the calculated resonance frequency of the ship's hull. At 2 p.m., the devices were activated simultaneously. In the first minute, nothing happened. In the second minute, observers noticed something strange: the ship began to vibrate. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but instruments detected micro-oscillations. In the third minute, a massive crack appeared. A fracture surged at the waterline, running 30 meters from bow to stern in seconds. It wasn't an explosion, it was a catastrophic structural failure caused by material fatigue. Within 20 minutes, the ship was on the bottom of the bay. 0 explosions. 0 fires. 0 fuel leaks. The ship simply died in silence. When the results were presented, the silence in the command room was sepulchral. Admiral Duque, who had mocked the device, turned pale. He immediately understood the implications: a weapon that could sink ships without leaving obvious evidence of an attack, with no radar signature, no thermal signature, and no debris indicating sabotage. To an investigator, it would look like a natural structural failure, like so many old ships that sink due to material fatigue. But there was a bigger problem. If it could do this to an empty tanker, what could it do to modern, larger vessels with people on board? Gama assured them the weapon was precise. The frequencies could be adjusted, and the sinking time could be controlled, from a rapid collapse to a gradual failure that allowed for evacuation. The Navy approved the production of 50 units. In May 1982, the Navy organized a secret military exercise called Operation Grey Neptune. The goal was to simulate the neutralization of an enemy fleet anchored in Santos Bay without causing civilian casualties or environmental damage. The Navy discreetly negotiated with international cruise companies to use their ships as simulated targets without revealing the nature of the test. The cruises would be monitored, but not damaged. The devices would be activated at minimum power just to measure vibrations. On June 3, 1982, 20 cruise ships were anchored in the bay. They were giants, the largest carrying 4,000 passengers. During the previous night, Navy divers had installed 60 devices on the seabed under each ship. At 6 a.m., Captain Jorge Mendez received the order to start the test. At 6:15, Mendez activated the first set of devices. From 5 kilometers away on the Constituico, he monitored sensors through binoculars. At first, nothing seemed different. Then, the sensors began to detect vibrations. By 6:18, structural vibrations were detected on the first ship. By 6:22, microcracks were simulated on the fifth hull. By 6:30, 10th ship, critical resonance reached. Computers indicated that at full power, the ships would sink in 12 minutes. By 6:45 a.m., all 20 ships were vibrating at their critical frequencies. The computers displayed a cold, precise message: simulation complete. All targets neutralized. Estimated sinking time, 8 to 15 minutes. 0 explosions detected. 0 simulated leaks. Mendez turned off the devices. The ships stopped vibrating. No one on board the cruises had noticed anything. The frequencies were too low for humans to feel. But something unexpected happened. At 7 a.m., reports began coming in from the cruise ships. Passengers and crew were reporting dizziness, nausea, and extreme disorientation. Hundreds of people had woken up feeling ill. Some vomited, others fainted. Several were hospitalized with symptoms resembling severe motion sickness. Gama was alarmed. Investigation revealed the cause. The 7 Hz infrasound waves were affecting the human vestibular system, the part of the inner ear responsible for balance. This meant the old man's fart was not just an anti-ship weapon, it was also a non-lethal weapon against crews. At moderate power, it could incapacitate an entire enemy ship without sinking it, making it possible to capture vessels intact. The discovery changed everything. The Navy High Command called an emergency meeting. Gama was questioned harshly about what else he hadn't told them. He replied with brutal honesty, "I don't know. We've never tested it at full scale. If we use this against an entire fleet, the effects could be unpredictable. Infrasound waves can travel for miles in water. They could affect marine life or cause panic in coastal cities." Admiral Duque asked the question no one wanted to answer: can this weapon be detected? Gama hesitated, then replied, "No. Not with current technology. Underwater infrasound doesn't show up on conventional sonar. We have created the perfect weapon for naval assassination. Invisible, silent, deadly." After weeks of debate, the Navy made an extraordinary decision: Project Silent Thunder would be classified as top secret and archived indefinitely. The 50 units produced were sealed in an undisclosed underground warehouse. All technical documents were classified, and the engineers signed lifetime secrecy agreements. The official reason: the weapon was too dangerous for tactical use, with an unacceptable risk of proliferation. The real reason: fear. Fear that if the technology leaked, terrorists or other nations would replicate it. Fear that one day it would be used against civilian ships. Captain Jorge Mendez was transferred to an administrative post and ordered never to speak of what he had witnessed. Admiral Roberto Gamafilio retired in 1985 and died in 2003, taking many secrets to the grave. The nickname Old Man's Fart remained in internal Navy use, a way to ridicule a weapon that was too terrifying to be taken seriously in public. Officially, Project Silent Thunder never existed. However, in 2019, a declassified report revealed a curious entry in the 1982 budget for underwater acoustic test equipment for Operation Grey Neptune, with a handwritten footnote: devices stored. Use prohibited without presidential authorization. Destruction scheduled for 2025. Today, naval engineers speculate that acoustic resonance technology did not die with the Brazilian project. In 2008, a Chinese cargo ship sank mysteriously in the South China Sea. There was no explosion and no fuel leak, the hull simply opened up. In 2015, a Russian submarine disappeared in deep water, attributed to structural failure. In 2023, 3 North Korean fishing vessels sank simultaneously. North Korea accused imperialist sabotage, but no evidence was found. Coincidences? Perhaps. Or perhaps the old man's fart has descendants scattered around the world, in the hands of navies that learn the best weapon is the one no one sees, no one hears, and no one can prove exists. Admiral Duque was right about one thing: when you create the perfect weapon for naval assassination, you don't just create a weapon, you create a secret that others will die to discover.